There's something eerie about hearing a man who once ruled hip-hop's underworld talk like he's already halfway in the grave. Suge Knight, once the muscle and mastermind behind Death Row Records, spent decades keeping his mouth shut about Tupac's murder. Then out of nowhere from a California prison cell, he decided to tell his version. One that flips nearly everything we thought we knew. He swears he's not trying to stir chaos, but every word he's said since has felt like a spark tossed into gasoline. He begins not with the shooting, but with betrayal. That, he says, is where the story really starts, not on the Las Vegas Strip, not even in the MGM brawl, but months earlier, when loyalty became currency and everybody had a price. In his words, Death Row had grown too powerful. Edging the charts, so they had to touch us in the streets. That line alone tells you how Knight sees himself, the general of an empire under siege. In 1996, Tupac wasn't just a rapper, he was an energy field. Fresh out of prison, thanks to Suge's money, he was dropping double platinum albums, dissing rivals, and becoming the symbol of West Coast dominance. But Suge says the success also painted a target on both their backs. He talks about phone calls that went unanswered, bodyguards who suddenly stopped showing up, and meetings where people smiled too long. To him, it was obvious someone, somewhere, was setting the stage for a fall. Then came Vegas. September 7th, Tyson Fight Night. The cameras caught them both, Tupac in a white suit, Suge in red, rolling like kings through the MGM Grand. When Orlando Baby Lane Anderson appeared, the tension exploded. The footage shows fists flying, chains swinging, chaos. That clip became hip-hop legend, but Suge now calls it the trap trigger. He believes that brawl wasn't random, it was bait. They knew Pac couldn't walk away from a fight, he says. They used that pride against him. Hours later, the two men were cruising down Flamingo Road in a black BMW, music blasting, fans cheering from the sidewalks. Then came the white Cadillac, the spray of bullets, the screaming. Everyone knows that part. What nobody expected were the words that followed years later, Suge claiming Tupac was conscious, talking, even cracking jokes with cops as he bled out. He describes Tupac asking for blunts and Hennessy in the hospital, half grinning through tubes and wires. It sounds cinematic, almost too defiant to be real. Doctors who've read the reports doubt it happened that way. They say Tupac was barely clinging to life. But Suge insists he remembers every breath. According to him, the real heartbreak wasn't the shooting, it was what came after. In that hospital room, Suge says he saw Tupac's invincibility dissolve. The rapper who once stared down bullets suddenly feared something worse than death. Prison. Pac believed the MGM assault might send him back, and he couldn't take that again. Suge claims Tupac begged him to end it, to pull the plug before the state could put him back in a cage. He told me, "I can't do another cell. If I die, at least I die free." Suge swore he refused, but the plea never left his head. What followed is the part that still divides believers from skeptics. Suge says Tupac's mother, Afeni Shakur, made the final call, that she looked at her son, saw the agony, and told doctors not to bring him back if he slipped away. Some call it mercy, others murder. There's no proof, no paperwork, nothing but Suge's word. Yet when he says it, his voice drops from fury to grief, like he's reliving the moment. "She let him rest," he whispers. I respected it. That image, Afeni's trembling hand, Tupac fading under sterile lights, hits harder than any gunfire. It's the kind of moment legends are built on. A mother's mercy, a friend's guilt, a legacy sealed in silence. For almost 30 years, Suge carried that silence. Now he's breaking it, and the world isn't ready for what comes next. The more Suge Knight talked, the more it sounded like he wasn't just reliving history, he was rewriting it. The moment he started naming names, it stopped being a story about a drive-by and became something bigger, darker, and almost cinematic. He said it wasn't gang rivalry, not random vengeance, not even fate. It was a setup. Contracts, $1 million deal, wrapped in fear and greed. And the name he dropped at the center of it all? Diddy. Suge claims the chain of betrayal didn't end in Las Vegas. It started in boardrooms and backrooms, in whispered phone calls between men who wore designer suits but moved like gangsters. According to him, Diddy didn't just want to win the East Coast-West Coast war, he wanted it ended permanently. Knight says Diddy feared what Tupac was becoming, a threat that was no longer musical but mythic. Tupac's success under death row wasn't just a victory, it was a declaration that Bad Boy's reign was over. Then came what Suge calls the confession. He says it happened years later at a Lakers game of all places. There he was, out on parole, enjoying a rare moment of freedom when he spotted Dwayne Keefe D. Davis in the crowd. Keefe D was a name that had haunted this case for decades, the uncle of Orlando Anderson, the man many believe pulled the trigger. Suge claims Keefe D approached him nervously, almost like he had a burden to unload. He looked me dead in the eye, Suge said, and told me Puffy owed him $1 million. What followed, according to Suge, was a confession that flipped the entire narrative. Keefe D allegedly told him the shooting was a hit job. Half the money was paid upfront, and the rest was supposed to come after both Suge and Tupac were gone. They got most of it, Suge says, but never finished the deal. He recalls standing there, fists clenched, trying not to explode. The man who had just confessed to orchestrating one of the biggest murders in hip-hop history was sitting across from him, talking like it was business. Keefe D's words weren't entirely new. He'd bragged about the same thing in interviews, even wrote it in his book Compton Street Legend, but hearing it from Suge gave it a new menacing weight, especially when Suge claimed Keefe D said off-duty cops had been paid to look the other way. That's when the conspiracy started to sound less like a rap feud and more like an organized takedown. Suge described it as a whole system built to make sure Pac never came home again. The story keeps twisting. Suge says people close to him, people he trusted, were already bought off. He talks about bodyguards who switched shifts at the last minute, security teams who conveniently forgot their weapons, and drivers who changed routes without explanation. To him, every mistake that night wasn't coincidence. It was choreography. They didn't just kill a man, he said, they killed an empire. Then Suge turned his fire on those inside the circle. He accused big names, even hinted at Snoop Dogg of knowing more than they ever admitted. The receipts came back, he said cryptically, and some of them weren't clean. There's no evidence for any of it, but his tone, half rage, half heartbreak, makes it hard to dismiss outright. He's not talking like a mogul defending his legacy. He's talking like a soldier betrayed by his own army. And then there's the money. Suge says that after Tupac's death, people started showing up with offers, lawyers, producers, even men claiming to be tied to Diddy's camp. They allegedly offered him $1 million to sign a statement saying Keefe D wasn't at the scene. He refused, claiming they were trying to erase the one link that could expose the chain. They couldn't kill me, he said, so they tried to buy my silence. Every word out of Suge's mouth drips with that mix of bitterness and prophecy. He doesn't just want the world to know what happened, he wants the people he blames to feel it. Because in his mind, Tupac's death wasn't a tragedy of the streets. It was an assassination planned by men in suits who played God with the culture. Suge Knight sits behind bars now, older, slower, but still carrying the same fire that once made his name feared in every corner of the music world. When he speaks, his words don't come like confessions, they come like warnings. He calls himself the last man alive who knows the real story, the one nobody ever wanted told. To him, the whole world turned the Tupac story into entertainment, but for him, it never stopped being a wound that wouldn't close. He's no saint. Everyone knows his reputation. Violence, intimidation, deals sealed in blood instead of ink. The stories from the death row days are legendary and terrifying. Hotel beatings, studio fights, contracts signed under threat. Suge doesn't deny any of it. He says he was just a product of his world, a man doing what it took to survive when the streets and the boardroom demanded the same kind of ruthlessness. I never claimed to be clean, he once said, but I never betrayed the ones who rode with me. Now he's in a cell, stripped of all the power he built, watching the legacy he helped create being retold by people who never lived it. He laughs bitterly when he hears podcasts or documentaries trying to decode the mystery. They all think they're detectives, he says, but none of them were there when the blood hit the glass. The way he tells it, Tupac wasn't just another artist he managed, he was family, a brother in every sense that mattered. That's why, even today, the guilt eats at him, not because he pulled the trigger, but because he couldn't stop it. The question everyone keeps circling is whether any of this is true. His story is full of holes, contradictions, and unverified claims. There's no paper trail for the $1 million bounty, no witnesses backing his account of Afeni's decision, and no forensic evidence proving betrayal within death row. But that's the strange thing about Suge. His words don't feel like a man inventing lies. They sound like someone who's been waiting too long to be heard. Maybe parts of it are twisted by time, maybe memory and pride have blurred the truth, but every sentence carries the ache of someone who's seen too much. He calls Tupac Black Jesus, not out of blasphemy, but out of reverence. He says Tupac died for something bigger than himself, for the idea that a man from nothing could rise high enough to scare giants. Suge compares their story to scripture: betrayal, sacrifice, resurrection through legend. He quotes the Bible when he talks about it. Judas took 30 pieces of silver, he says quietly, and so did they. You can hear the venom, but also the sorrow. It's not about revenge anymore. It's about the need to be remembered right. There's a tragic irony in his reflections. The man who once towered over hip-hop now spends his days surrounded by concrete and metal, reminiscing about nights when his phone never stopped ringing. He admits that prison broke him in ways the streets never could. "My worst day out there," he says, "was still better than my best day in here." Yet even behind bars, he refuses to play victim. He claims he was framed, targeted by the same system that killed Tupac in spirit long before the bullets flew. The world may never know what's real and what's myth in Suge Knight's version of history, but his words have forced the spotlight back onto a case everyone thought was finished. With Keef D awaiting trial and Diddy's name still floating in whispers, the shadows of 1996 are alive again. Maybe Suge's story is one final attempt at redemption. Maybe it's just another layer of smoke in a mystery built entirely on fog. What's undeniable is that when Suge Knight speaks, people still listen, and whether he's telling the truth or rewriting it to save his soul, one thing is certain: the story of Tupac Shakur will never die as long as Suge Knight keeps breathing.